Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds.
Hi, I'm Dr. Roselle, Chief Operating Officer for Urban Farming Education, and I'm really excited today hosting another episode of Harvesting Wisdom. We have some great guests from ASU to talk about, well, the various roles that they play at the university and the impact they have on the community. So I'd like my guests to introduce themselves, so we're just going to dive right in. We'll have you go ahead and start. Absolutely.
My name is Arianne Cease. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sustainability and School of Life Sciences at ASU, and also director of the Global Locust Initiative.
I'm Rick Overson. I'm a research scientist at Arizona State University, and I work with Dr. Cease to do locust research at ASU and also work with a global network of stakeholders.
Okay, I'm sure there's a story behind the research you do. So talk to me about what you do with the College of Sustainability and the research that you do. Let's start with that and see where we end up.
All right. So we study grasshoppers and locusts. They are major transboundary migratory pests, particularly locusts are particularly migratory. So we work across disciplines and sectors and all over the world to try to understand their biology and how we can better sustainably manage them.
Okay, we recently had the University of Arizona Extension on, they talked about pest management. Specifically, what is the threat for locusts and for crops in Arizona or around the world?
Yeah, and we'll just bounce back and forth.
Sure. Yeah.
You guys can tag, or you can just jump right in.
You're right.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about grasshoppers and locusts is they really don't harm people directly. So a lot of times I think when you think about bugs, you think about wasps stinging you, something spreading diseases or getting bit. But that's not the case with locusts and grasshoppers. The threat is their appetite and the fact that they can respond really quickly to the environment, catch us off guard, come out in large numbers, and eat all of our food. And we don't have a true locust species in the United States, but we have grasshoppers that are locust-like and that have challenges to their management, and we'll sure talk about those nuances in a bit. And then locusts are a whole nother challenge in and of themselves, and they are very devastating because they can eat huge amounts of food in a very short amount of time, and especially in places where communities are very vulnerable.
So I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in agriculture, and I've just dipped my toes in switching careers from education into farming, but it's not, locusts and grasshoppers aren't typical pests that you hear. We've had a couple folks on that talked about all the pests with cotton and some other crops, but what specific crops are locusts and grasshoppers really going after?
Yeah, so in the U.S., grasshoppers are a major pest to rangelands. So that's probably why it's not so common for folks to hear about them unless they're, descending on cities like they came to Vegas in the last few years. So you see the headlines on that.
Yeah.
So they're major rangeland pests in the U.S. There's an annual program to control them. And they're actually, I think, one of the only pests where there's an immediate mandate by the USDA to manage them when they get above a certain threshold level. But in other parts of the world, they're more commonly pests of crops and gardens and whatnot. Locusts in particular typically eat a variety of, basically any crop out there. They eat the clothes off the clotheslines, that sort of thing. Maybe I can ask Rick to talk a little bit more about what is a locust and how is it different from a grasshopper, and why are they particularly challenging to manage?
Yeah, so locusts are just as fascinating as they are dangerous as an ecological and evolutionary phenomena. So they've been doing their thing since time immemorial, long before humans had agriculture, and they are a natural force. One of the really fascinating things about them is that they're basically just a special type of grasshopper. So you got thousands of species of grasshoppers, depending on who you ask, there's about 19 species of true locusts. And they do this pretty wild thing, which is that they basically have a genotype that allows them to engage in phenotypic plasticity, which pretty much all organisms do.
And that means?
Respond to our environment.
What does that mean?
It means that you can get two morphs from the same genotype.
Okay.
And pretty much every organism on the planet does that in subtle ways, but locusts do it in a crazy way, which is that they can be one form that we call a solitarious form that looks like a normal grasshopper. It's green, kind of hides itself. And if environmental conditions are right, which in the case of the desert locust is that there's rains that come suddenly, grow a lot of plants, that creates more of them. They realize, hey, there's a lot of us through like seeing and smelling and touching one another. They completely switch to a different developmental pathway. They change color, their brain chemistry changes.
Wow.
They turn in like sort of dramatic, totally different colors, look like a completely different species. They then start aggregating. They march together in coordinated formations, and then eventually they darken the skies with massive swarms if those conditions persist. And there's nothing in that other solitarious form that does any of those things. And so both of those forms exist cryptically in that same genotype. So it's an amazing adaptation, an amazing sort of evolutionary and ecological force.
So I'm curious, with climate change, we see that with the inputs changing, water, heat, it impacts lots of species. How is the rise in temperature or shortage of water or extreme weather conditions with, you have some areas that have too much, too little, you kind of highlighted the too much. How are you seeing this impact the species you're talking about?
Yeah, they're crazy. Yeah,
I'm going to give you guys buzzers.
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to jump in,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, that's a great question and something that we do a lot of thinking about. And the first answer that I always give to that is that, so locusts in general, there's exceptions because there's exceptions to everything in biology, but locusts in general, a lot of the species, especially the main poster child ones, they're really good at persisting in arid regions. But they do just that. They sort of persist, and we don't really pay attention to them. And then when there are these sporadic and sort of unpredictable weather events, like a typhoon dumps a bunch of rain in Oman, they capitalize on that very quickly, and they multiply rapidly. And so one of the really interesting and future challenges for us is that it's really important, as you might imagine, to catch those outbreaks early, and that requires forecasting and being able to predict things. But the problem with climate change is it's turning the dials on the weather. And so like these, as we know from watching the news, like some of these sporadic events are like might be happening more regularly, or 1,000-year floods are happening every year. And so that's
places and
they seem to be localized too. Weather seems to be localized with some of the extreme weather too. So I could see how that can impact regionally. So it's almost like you guys have to be storm chasers, but you're bug chasers to make sure that they don't hit a certain threshold then, I imagine, right?
Yeah, and it is an insane challenge, especially to manage like the desert locust, as Rick was talking about, most dangerous migratory pest on the planet. During plague years, it can impact more than 60 countries.
Wow.
And so it's a huge landmass, multiple continents, Northern Africa, Southwest Asia, and each of these countries where there are breeding zones needs to have a consistent monitoring program.
So what does that look like? What does the monitoring program look like? And it was interesting when we talked to the folks at the U of A. They said that they would go out with nets and they would catch the pest and count, and then they would do a pest management program. So what does the monitoring look like? I know that there's not locust radar. So I mean, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, locusts actually can be caught on radar if they're.
Because of the big. Wow.
Yeah, because there's a big flux of biological mass migrating through the sky.
Yeah, that's a very terrifying guy.
It is, but yeah, they're transboundary migratory pests, which is a much different beast than handling a pest that's going to be more localized.
Yeah.
And so what it's not just like what your exact neighboring neighbor does, like your field neighbor is going to impact you, but it's like what the next country does, or what a country like 3 or 4 or a continent across does, is, can lead to this migratory swarm invading your country.
So that's interesting. I know that some of the issues we've talked about have been localized. How do you see countries cooperating, working together? It seems like sometimes we can't agree on anything, but this would be an issue where we would force to do it. What agencies or organizations or programs out there are getting people to work together to manage this pest?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I think locusts can be a good example of how we can come together across boundaries to manage these really challenging sustainable challenges. So for the desert locust, the Food and Agriculture Organization has sponsors 3 locust commissions. Those are divided west, central, and eastern region. And they have about 10 countries depending on the region. And then those are mostly organized internally. So like the western region, for example, has annual meetings. And then each country pays into that commission based on their GDP. And then those resources get transmitted to help provide like training and monitoring and that sort of thing. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of potential to have that system not work. So a lot of places where the desert locust does have breeding areas are often under conflict. And so when that's happening, the monitoring's not happening. When you don't have an upsurge for 10, 20, 60 years, the monitoring stops happening.
Well, I can imagine that. I'm sure that the threat just kind of disappears. Mm-hmm. So in the people's minds, it's still there. With you describing such a persistent or hardy species, it coming back, it kind of blindside people. I based on what you just said, what I'd be curious about, because now I'm thinking about all these science fiction movies. What does it look like when there is an outbreak or a swarm, and you go out and try to curtail that? I know you guys don't go out with fly swatters, so what do you do to curtail the swarm once it's happening?
Yeah, so I'm going to pass it over to Rick, but I'm going to start out and say, so we as a Global Locust Initiative aren't directly involved in management once there's a plague. We try and work on sort of more preventive approaches, and then we support folks whose mandate it is to manage locusts, and that typically is an aerial campaign if it gets to be large enough, so they're spraying from planes. But I wonder if Rick might talk about his first introduction to seeing locusts and countries come together. So when Rick joined the Global Locust Initiative, his first task was to join me in Bolivia, actually, and there was a 60-year locust upsurge. So we can talk about that and kind of how the 3 countries came together.
Yeah, I liked your question, because that is one of the things that has been really impressive to me about the sort of the politics of people coming together. And I think in some ways, like, locusts can be like a political and a social challenge to coordinate to manage them, but then they can also be like a great success case, because it is seen as this transboundary enemy that we can rally coordination around.
Common enemy.
Yeah. And we witnessed just that in 2015 to 2016, a huge locust outbreak happened in South America, and it's a South American species. It's native to South America, the South American locust. And just to highlight again the sporadic nature of this, it had been like 60 years since people anywhere in the South American continent had seen outbreaks of this scale. And so it was like stories from grandparents. And they came with a vengeance, came back for various reasons that people are still researching and trying to pinpoint. But as you might imagine, there was a big loss of infrastructure and know-how about how to manage that. And there was a really successful year or 2 long process of Brazil and Bolivia and Paraguay and Argentina collaborating with one another, and also bringing in folks from Europe to collaborate and help train, and bringing down researchers like us from ASU to coordinate with people, and that's built like a big support network that we're trying to keep alive, and not slide backwards. So, but to your point about kind of the scale of these outbreaks, it's also like really incredible and difficult to imagine. And so that's I think one of the most challenging things for people when you talk about it. If you haven't witnessed it, and most of us in the United States haven't, it's really meteorological in its scale. And so
so you're talking thousands of square miles.
Yeah, so like
Which
in
is
a big outbreak of the desert locust, you have swarms the size of Manhattan with 40 to 80 million or more individuals in them.
Yeah.
And that's just a single swarm in a sort of a big kind of continental, like alien invasion, so to speak. And like you'll see looks like dust on the horizon and a band across the whole horizon. And that's like grasshoppers the size of a man's finger that will fly by for like 3 hours. You'll just see like what looks like a dust storm. And that's just one small swarm that can land and eat the food of 30,000 people in a day. And so it's massive in its scale. It's really better to think of it as a meteorological event at that level rather than an insect.
Wow. Yeah, when you're describing that, I went camping on Antelope Island, which is by the Great Salt Lake, and the flies. I remember looking in the distance and saying, "Oh, that cloud's moving." And my wife's like, "That's a swarm of flies." I'm like, "No way!" And then we drove into it, and it was like flies were raining into us. Yes. You know, one of the questions I'm really curious about too, whenever I talk about pest management, I kind of think about cleaning out the kitchen drawer. And this is a weird analogy, but when I clean it out, I just throw everything away. And my wife's like, "Well, we need those screws, we need the batteries." When I think of locust, we've talked about some of the pest management and the challenges they have, but they're part of our environment or ecological system. What benefits do they give? Because I'm assuming we don't want to wipe them out entirely. I'm sure there's a positive benefit. What are some of the positive benefits of locusts and grasshoppers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, grasshoppers evolved with the grasslands and other ecosystems, but they're among the dominant herbivores in grasslands. They're really critical base of the food web. They help cycle nutrients locally. They can help improve biodiversity of local vegetation if they're targeting some of the more dominant plant types. And they're also delicious. Oh. So almost everything, anything that can like catch a hopper and put it in its mouth is going to be eating them. So they're a major food source for
so
a lot
I'm
of different
foodie.
organisms.
I've got to ask, how do you guys like your grasshoppers? How do you like to eat them?
Arianne has a specific recipe that she's developed.
Well, we've got to share that with our viewers just in case kids are out there in the garden catching grasshoppers. How do you cook them? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways. You can fry them. You can grind them into a powder and add them to a stew. But I think one of the tastiest ways is you collect them and then you treat them kind of like a crustacean. They're closely related, right? And so you might remove the legs and the wings and the head and maybe take out the gut in the middle. It's kind of one long tube. And then maybe...
And like deveining a shrimp.
Yeah, like totally. Yeah. Thanks for the analogy. So you de-gut it. And you cover it in some oil, a little salt, and then, you can fry it, or I like to bake them and get nice and crispy. And they're pretty tasty like that, but then you can go a step further and put them into some dipping chocolate. Yeah, and it's kind of like a toffee,
so we have
like
the
a
sweet
crunchy
and the savory. I love it.
Yeah.
This is a weird question, but what is the nutritional values? Because I'm sure there's protein in it, and is it a good source of protein or?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good source of lots of nutrients. Depending on lots of good proteins and micronutrients. Depending on what the locust has been eating, what its body condition is, you might get some good lipids in there too. So yeah, lots of good stuff.
So I see. I think we presented a balanced picture now. They are a pest, but they do have a purpose in our environment when it comes to the food web and with grasslands. They do have do people eat them as far as a consistent food source? I know when we went to Malawi, there were grubs and worms that they ate, and we tried it. It's not something I'm used to, but when we talked to the folks that lived there, they said, "Oh, it's a delicacy. It brought them back to their childhood." So Is there a part when you were in South America where did you guys see that they were eating the grasshoppers? It sounds like they were pretty abundant. So
Yeah, there's certainly all kinds of grasshopper consumption in many cultures all around the world. We should do more of it in the United States. Yeah, and there are traditional practices like chapulines is like in Mexico, where those are not always true locusts, but they're grasshoppers that outbreak, where they do chili and lime on them and kind of sell them in. Yeah, you can get tacos of them.
Grasshopper taco, I love it.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, there's actually a restaurant in Phoenix here that I saw serves grasshopper tacos, like Oaxacan style. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're almost out of time, but I wonder if we might do a little GLI commercial. Is that okay?
Absolutely. The closing question I have, and you can interpret this how you want, is what do you want to say about the organization you're working with? What are some upcoming events or things that you want to bring awareness to?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the challenge of managing locusts. It's a vicious cycle. So you have an upsurge, you have a lot of organizations and funding that goes towards that, building of monitoring programs. As there's a recession and you see less and less of them, that all degrades. So the people, the knowledge, the infrastructure, all of that. Until ecological conditions come again to be favorable for locusts, and you get this massive plague. And so actually before 2018, there was no global organization to link people and ideas. There are regional organizations, as we talked about earlier, but no global organization. And it is a devastating pest and a huge gap. So we were really excited to be at ASU. And a place that supports these transdisciplinary efforts. And we received support from President Crow to start the Global Locust Initiative. And maybe Rick can talk about a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing here at ASU to sort of help shore up the problems that this vicious cycle creates are to provide a network of communication and a repository to sort of build up information. And we have 2 online tools, cleverly named Hopper Link and Hopper Wiki.
Love it.
And one of them is basically like a LinkedIn for locusts, basically, as we say. And so we have around 250 members now from around 40 countries, everyone from graduate students in Africa who are working on locusts with their PhDs, to land managers, to plant protection agency officials who are all kind of in this LinkedIn environment in a flat democratic structure where we can have open and honest conversations about the messy social, political, management themes and biology of this grand challenge that we've talked about. And the other younger project that we're really excited about that we've been dumping content into and working with stakeholders to help us build information resources is Hopper Wiki, which uses the same software as Wikipedia. So it's live now at hopperwiki.org, and it's basically all the trying to stockpile the world's foundational resources on locusts and grasshoppers to sort of raise the bar and not start from scratch every time this vicious cycle resets.
Well, and I'd love to invite you guys to come to our conference at GCU in February. We have a couple of academic tracks, but listening to you guys talk, one of the things I'm thinking about too is I think it'd be great if you guys could connect with the ranchers that are out there. I'm sure that you guys have a lot of practical advice on how to do prevention or who to talk to if they see this. So is that one of your target partner groups here in the Southwest?
Yeah, so we work with ranchers and the USDA who oversee rangeland management in the U.S., and then we work with farming communities and plant protection organizations in many regions around the world, West Africa, South America, Australia, and China. And so, yeah, we one of our major projects is working in West Africa with several hundred farmers to improve soils. So some
very much
your own work.
Yeah.
And by improving the soils, by adding compost, you actually make a plant that has too much protein for locusts. So locusts really require a donut diet, so a lot of carbs, very little protein to thrive. And so, yeah, on the scale of, villages across Senegal, we've shown that this can be an effective management tool. So I imagine this would also be implemented well here in the U.S. And yeah, the final thing I'd like to note is that to complement all of the network activities that Rick was talking about, we have a laboratory where we have lots of field and also laboratory research. The other major aim that I think is important is a biopesticide, a fungus that targets locusts and grasshoppers. So we're excited to work on that. And then we're also thrilled to recently have Dr. Ho-Jun Song, who is the world's expert on orthopteran evolution, join ASU. So our GLI lab and network are continuing to grow, and I invite people to check us out, check out our website and come visit our lab.
Well, we really appreciate the information you guys shared today, and we're very excited about making connections between the work you guys do and the people that it impacts. So if you're curious, we're going to put your links on the research you're working on and all the projects you have. So check out the links, and we look forward to hearing more in the future. Thanks so much for being here for another episode of Harvesting Wisdom, where practical knowledge is really saving the day for ranchers and farmers around the world. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.